Hello, everybody. So today I was getting my hair cut and I was talking to my hairdresser, and she's amazing. I love her. She refuses to take my money and she makes me look amazing. And I was telling her about the time that I was kind of like a prison guard for a hot minute. And the place that I worked, it's called Fulton State Hospital. Doesn't sound like a prison, doesn't it? It's a hospital, right? No, what it is basically the place that people get sent to in Missouri if they plead insanity. And most people who go to Fulton State Hospital do not get out. A lot of people end up living their whole lives there, and it's not a great place. From what I saw, there are like some regulations that make it slightly less bad than it used to be, I guess. But y'all probably see the elephant in the room, which is that I'm an anarchist. I'm a socialist. I'm a prison abolitionist, actually. To be like a little bit more precise, these places shouldn't exist. They're incredible violations on the autonomy of human beings, and it's not good for anybody. It's just not good for anybody. It doesn't make any sense. And so like how did this happen to me? Why was I working in this place? The first thing that I got to tell you is that I was 23 years old and severely mentally ill, and yeah, kind of ironic, I guess, right? At the time I was very mentally ill. And I was not ideologically developed at this time. This was also pre-transition, by the way, which is kind of relevant to the story. So, the reason I ended up working there is because I needed money. I had a really, really big hospital bill from attempting suicide, and that hospital bill, frankly, kind of made me want to just try again. It was like, oh my god, I'm stuck living at my abusive parents' house. I was between like a rock and a hard place, like, do I want to be homeless or do I want to live with my abusive parents? And how am I going to take care of this hospital bill? How am I going to get out of here? I can't afford anything. I can't afford to live. So I thought, maybe I got to get my shit together and try to work a full-time job that makes a little decent amount of money. I'm going to get my shit together. And so what I saw was this position at Fulton State Hospital paid honestly better than most places at the time. You could actually probably afford an apartment and bills and groceries on this kind of wage compared to like, if you try to work full-time at Walmart or anywhere else that I was qualified for, because I was a disabled person with a shit work history and who hasn't graduated college. So I decided, I'll give it a try. And besides, it's a psychiatric hospital, right? I'm somebody who experienced mental illness, so I'm probably going to be a good person for the job. I'm going to have like more empathy and understanding to somebody who's in the situation. At this point, I had been involuntarily hospitalized twice. So from what little I knew about Fulton State Hospital, I kind of thought, maybe the place would be a little bit less shitty if I was there. A lot of people get like this idea, especially liberal people. They think like, the system's bad, well, I can change it. Turns out it doesn't work that way, actually. If you're like, well, what if I was a good cop and it would change everything? No, it doesn't. You probably hear people say like, oh, I think maybe policing has its problems, but if I was a police officer, then it would be a little bit less bad because I'm a minority too, and like I know the problems, I know the discrimination. I can like talk to the other police that I work with, and like it's gonna be a little bit better because I'm there. And it's like, it doesn't work that way. Either you're gonna get corrupted pretty damn quick, or you're going to get pushed out, or you're going to have a realization you're going to quit pretty soon. Good cops quit, period. That's how it is. So this is my story of being the good cop that quit, I guess. And to be clear, my title was something like a care support specialist. One of the lowest possible positions there, and it still paid like more than 16 an hour, which especially in Missouri and especially in, what was it, 2016, 2017? Yeah, this was 2016. In Missouri now in 2025, it's hard to find jobs that pay 16, and like I'm sure it's probably up to $20 by now. Something kind of interesting about Fulton State Hospital that I learned while I was working there is that it has, or had at the time, the highest rates of workers' compensation being taken out by a workplace compared to like anywhere else in the state. It had the highest rate of workers' injuries in the state. And, you know, they told us pretty quickly during training that a lot of people would get bit. A lot of people would get bit very hard and the skin would break, or they would be hit, they would be pummeled, they would be attacked by the people that we were encouraged to call patients, who really, by all accounts, were inmates in this facility. I was only there for about a month. We had like a 4-week training program. 40 hours a week was just training for a whole month. And at the end of that month, I was like, no, you know what, this isn't for me. And one of the things that made me realize this was an interaction that I had with one of the inmates there. So there were a few times where while we were training, we would get an opportunity to just be in the building, in the facility, and basically have like supervised and supported interaction with the incarcerated people. And one memory that really sticks out to me is this guy who probably was close to my age now, probably in his early mid 30s, maybe a younger guy. And he told me the reason why he was in Fulton State Hospital. He told me that the way this started for him was he was put in prison for a weed possession charge. It was only like a year or two. I mean, like I say only, but that's a very significant portion of a human being's life. And of course, it's bullshit, and he shouldn't have faced any goddamn legal consequence whatsoever for having weed. It's absurd. It's ridiculous. I think most of y'all are gonna be on the same page with me, and I'm not gonna justify, I'm not gonna argue with that. It's just very self-evident, of course. And I'm sure that a lot of you are also very aware of the systemic racism involved with the drug war, right? So anyway, this was a guy who was telling me he was incarcerated, he was in prison because of a weed possession charge. And he has bipolar disorder. I think he said bipolar type 1, so he would be prone to mania. And for some people who are prone to mania, sometimes it can look like anger. Really depends. Like there's a lot of different things that can come out with mania, but really, I think the key thing to think about mania is arousal, as in like emotional heightened state. So that can be a very energized person, a very reactive, potentially, person. So this guy, he has bipolar disorder. He said that whenever he was admitted into prison, that for whatever reason, they were not giving him his bipolar medication anymore. He was on a mood stabilizer, and it made his like behavioral and social and emotional state even enough to get along, And so there was a kind of a triple combo here. For one, there's the obvious. He was already locked up in a box. That's already going to create unusual social and emotional behavior in a human being that we usually do not see in people. It's just a natural consequence of doing that to someone. The second thing, his medication was taken away from him. The third thing that happened to him was a prison guard, for whatever reason, I guess he described it as had it out for him. And this guard, while he was away, went into his cell and just fucked up his room. Any of the few little things that he possessed, any of the tiny things that he could call comfort in this situation, just like broke and destroyed a lot of the shit that was in his cell. Just totally tore it apart. And I guess he just kind of snapped and lost it and beat the shit out of this prison guard. beat him to like an inch of his life. Really, really hurt this guy. And so he had to go to court again. And the legal defense was like, we're gonna plead that you have bipolar disorder and it's not your fault because, you weren't really competent when this behavior happened. So we're gonna basically do like the insanity plead. And that's how we ended up in Fulton State Hospital. And it's just, if you ask me personally, I think the way that he behaved makes perfect sense. I think that he was put in an unreasonable situation, and this was a reasonable response to the situation that he was put in. And even though at this time I didn't have like a critical education, I didn't know shit about socialism, I didn't know the first thing about prison abolition, but I knew that I didn't want to be a part of what they were doing here. I had no reason to doubt this man's story, and I just didn't think that I should be one of the people keeping him in there. It didn't make sense to me. It's not good for him. If this guy has bipolar disorder and I want him to be healthy and happy and, I guess like ostensibly assimilated into the society that we have now, putting him in Fulton State Hospital for life is not doing that for him. Him being in the hospital for life isn't good for his family. It isn't good for his friends. I definitely saw myself in this man, and I thought, correctly, this is something that could happen to me. It's something that could happen to people like me. It's just a matter of being unlucky enough to be caught with weed by a cop one day. And now, of course, weed is recreationally legal in Missouri, and this guy presumably is still in Fulton Hospital. Maybe if I had seen evidence that Fulton State Hospital was like effectively rehabilitative, then maybe I would have had a different opinion, right? Maybe I'd be like, well, maybe this is the only thing that can be done for a certain type of person, trying to get into the brain space of like who I was when I was 23. Essentially every person that I met at Fulton State Hospital, me being somebody who is disabled by mental illness, I met people who had severe trauma from a very young age, people who had abusive caregivers or parents like I did, people who were very impoverished, people who were racial minorities, and also, side note, this was a hospital for men, and there were, to my knowledge at the time, 4 trans women who were also incarcerated in this facility. With every incarcerated person that I talked to who was willing to open up and share with me their situation, I saw myself in these people. I just saw disadvantaged and forgotten about people who were left behind by a society that ostensibly was supposed to be supporting them and giving them a place. And when that place in society was either refused to them at a young age or taken away from them due to discrimination or some kind of incredibly unjust law, like with the possession charge, I couldn't find any reason why I should be in the position that I was in, and he should be in the position he was in. For me to be in this position of authority over him, and for me to be the person to tell him what to do and when, honestly, it made me really angry that I was being granted this power over people with no, reasonable explanation for why I should be in that position. I couldn't think of any reason. I guess my coworkers, what they must have thought is, well, I'm not a bad person, I'm not a criminal, so of course they should listen to me. And it's just like, man, the only crime a lot of these people committed, these incarcerated people committed, was being victimized, abused, and sometimes left for dead with severe disabilities by their communities, by their families. So again, it's like if I had seen some kind of evidence that these people were being treated with dignity and humanity, which in my opinion, and I think this is very evident, it's not going to be effectively rehabilitative treatment if somebody's being dehumanized. How are you going to help somebody be a good person if you're not treating them like a fucking person in the first place, right? So whenever I was working in this place, training in this place, doing tours of the residential areas, if you've ever been involuntarily hospitalized, it looked a little bit like that on the inside, where there'd sort of be like a front desk in each of these like wings of the residential areas. Then it would sort of go out into like a I guess like a hallway, and all of the furniture that was there was very, very heavy, very uncomfortable, and things that people wouldn't be able to pick up. There wasn't a lot of furniture. There was no decoration. Any mirrors on the wall are metal, with like a shine, so it's very hard to even see yourself. Some of these mirrors have like dents or scratches on them as well. Most of them did. And the bedrooms of the people who lived in there were also incredibly barren. They call it a hospital, but it really truly was just a prison with a different name, a prison with a different kind of vibe. Just about every object, any items, personal belongings, there weren't really a lot of personal belongings that the inmates could even have. Almost any product that they would use would be used supervised. There was one time where I was at the front of the line helping people brush their teeth, essentially, because they can't apparently even be trusted with a goddamn toothbrush and toothpaste and mouthwash. We had individual containers of mouthwash, and I would hand them out, and they were just supposed to stand in front of me and use the mouthwash in front of me and spit it out in front of me, like I'm the fucking supervisor for you to wash your goddamn mouth. It's obscene. And note, I just want you to note that the mouthwash was also an alcohol-free mouthwash. There was actually an inmate who just swallowed his mouthwash in front of me, and it's like, man, what do you want me to do about it? First of all, it's alcohol-free. Like, you really think I'm supposed to micromanage? The man who swallowed his mouthwash in front of me was probably like 70 years old. He's a grown man. I was like 23 at the time, right? Like, it's obscene. The guy can wash his own damn mouth without me watching. Something that I found pretty interesting and strange about working and training at Fulton State Hospital is I'm not sure if there were like policies that were enforced upon them and that's why these trainings happened, or if it was an effort on the part of some more socially progressive people who worked there or what. But there would be trainings where they were trying to espouse kind of like socially progressive ideas onto the trainees. And some of this would be basically like sensitivity training type of stuff. I guess one good thing is that there were policies in place to ostensibly prevent the physical abuse of inmates, but I'm not really sure realistically how often that prevented the real abuses of the inmates who lived there. Having said that, what I found very interesting is that, for example, there was a training on trans people. I think it was actually a trans man who came in and was giving this training to us. And, kind of gave us the TLDR, like a trans person is, somebody who identifies differently from the sex assigned at birth. And that's whenever they told us that there were 4 trans women who were inmates at this facility. And there was this old man, a coworker, who was training at the same time as me. And he actually, during this training, said, well, a man's a man and a woman's a woman, and I'm not going to be calling a boy a girl or a girl a boy. And he's like real mad and like crosses his arms and shit. And the trainer, who's like this really timid trans guy who's just like standing at the front of the room, he's just like totally flabbergasted. He doesn't like snap back or anything. He just kind of like freezes up and eventually continues again. I think at that point I actually ended up saying something, and again, I didn't know very much about trans people. I didn't know that I was trans at the time. But I think in my professional grown-up voice, I tried to like, be like, nah, fuck you, man, that sucks. But just to give you an idea of like what kind of people are working here and like what kind of mistreatments the inmates are experiencing, it's not just, restraining yourself from hitting and punching and beating up the inmates. That doesn't mean that no abuse is happening. There was a training on deafness. There was a trainer who was talking about how, he works at Fulton State Hospital and his mom is deaf and deaf culture is a thing. And we're going to be working with a lot of people with a lot of various disabilities. And it's really important to do your due diligence outside of the job and learn about these disabilities. I totally agree. But it's just like, I don't know. Like, man, this is one of those things where I realize, like, liberals are fucking crazy, Because it's like, I mean, you can do these little sensitivity trainings, but the fact is like, if you respect a trans woman, not only are you gonna gender her properly, of course you're gonna do that, but you're also not gonna lock her up in a fucking box and supervise her when she brushes her teeth, supervise her when she eats, supervise her when she goes to the bathroom. That's not respect. That is not treating somebody with humanity and dignity. It's just not. And it really just felt like a lot of the people who were doing the trainings were under some kind of delusion that just because, workers were not allowed to hit or punch the inmates anymore, that oh, now we have these special grappling techniques that we use to subdue people in case they get angry, and it reduces injury. It's like they thought that because the physical abuse was not leaving bruises or breaking bones, that they were not abusing people. There were 2 or 3 times where one of the inmates would actually be a part of our training program. There was one inmate who, in front of all of us, gave like a speech or a talk essentially about how they ended up in Fulton State Hospital. And the emotional impact for this one in particular was very challenging for me. So the inmate who was telling their story, they were starting from the beginning of when they were very young, because as somebody who's in this particular facility, their mental health and their personal history was quite relevant, of course. And this person had been repeatedly sexually assaulted as a child from a very young age, over and over. It just was constant, and they had very severe PTSD as a result, as you would imagine. And as they grew older, they found that, and I want to be extremely clear about this is not something that most or all, definitely not all, and definitely not most, victims of child sexual assault experience. This is not very common. But this person went on to perpetuate the same types of abuse that had happened to them as a child. And they explained it was something that they felt a great amount of shame. That was very hard to cope with from even before they started perpetuating the same type of abuse. They struggled with self-harm very badly, which was evident. They were wearing short sleeves, and he had self-harm scars on both arms that looked like he had been attacked by an animal and reconstructed. Like, it was visually quite severe. And I can only imagine that he had been hospitalized for injuries, I would imagine, just from how severe it was. Looking at it from very far away, you could see that his arms were just incredibly scarred. And This person had said that they had attempted suicide more than once, and it's really important to me that my audience understands, anybody who's watching this understands that I'm not making the claim that being a sexual assault victim as a child turns you into a PDF file. That's not what I'm saying here. I'm also not saying that having severe PTSD justifies abusing somebody, obviously. I hope that should be really clear. I hope that's something like a take that you would assume that I would make, but I'm going to make sure you know that that's, what I'm saying. But, this is a story that was told to me by this person 9 years ago. I can't exactly tell their story for them or recount it exactly, but from what I remember, this person felt like their PTSD and having experienced those abuses made it very challenging for them to stop themselves from perpetuating the abuse. And so that's how they ended up being in Fulton State Hospital. And it's just, I think that we failed this person and we could have done better for him. I think that locking him up in Fulton State Hospital is not the only option, right? Like, I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a therapist, I'm not like a behavioral expert or like a sexual pathologist or whatever. I have PTSD, and I have PTSD from being sexually abused and assaulted in my past. I don't have to know what the answer is. I don't have to have the program, like the rehabilitative program, developed for me to say, like, it's wrong. It's just wrong the way that this person was handled. Is it totally vital to protect people from somebody who's repeatedly perpetuating this type of abuse? Absolutely. But I think that we could have done something different. And the fact is that this person was failed from a very, very young age. A very young age. Where were the teachers stepping in? Where were the mental health professionals stepping in? A lot of people like to pretend that cops prevent this type of stuff from happening, right? But this person, it was happening to them for more than 18 years consecutively, since they were a baby. There was another inmate who described the type of abuse that they experienced when they were a child, and from what I remember, this person's parents were very, very abusive, and there was at least one instance where they were tied up at the doghouse outside, and I guess they just had to live outside like an animal for a couple of days because their parents were mad or whatever. It's just that I met people who were in this position where I was holding authority over them and working in conjunction with other people to keep them captive in this horrible facility because they were the bad people, quote unquote. And I was the good, responsible citizen doing the right thing and keeping everyone safe from these mentally ill, bad people. And it's just that every inmate that told their story to me, I couldn't stop thinking that the reason why I'm not here is just because I'm lucky. I'm lucky enough that even though I had very similar experiences to some of these people, I was able to access enough care and enough support that I didn't lash out in the same ways that they did. I was lucky that the way that I responded to my abuse was that I turned the anger inward. Whenever I would lash out, I would do it to myself and not to other people. I was lucky that for whatever reason, that's the way that I turned out, There's been a couple of times where, like, maybe I might have ended up being somebody who would be in prison or eventually in Fulton State Hospital as somebody who experienced severe and persistent abuse for the first 20 years of my life that resulted in PTSD. And I just didn't want to be a part of it, It was something that I had a lot of trouble verbalizing at the time because, again, I was not ideologically developed. I just knew it was wrong. I knew it was wrong and I didn't want to be a part of it. So at the end of those 4 weeks, I said, thanks for the $16 an hour for 40 hours a week for a whole month, and I'll see you bitches later, which is to say never, because this is never happening again. Yeah, hell nah. Hell nah. I'm going to tell one more story about something that happened whenever I was working at Fulton State Hospital, because it actually turned out I ended up being a person who was kind of victimized in a situation while I was there for only a handful of weeks. So, one of the 101 do's and don'ts of working at this facility for everybody's safety, do not go into an inmate's room. Do not go in there. For your safety and for their safety. If somebody has like an accusation against you, the cameras might not necessarily be able to sort out what happened in a room. In a hallway, you're more visible. In the main areas, you're more visible. If you do go into somebody's room, you cannot do that alone. You're going to be going in there with a coworker. It's going to be a whole thing. You probably want the inmate to not be in the room. Actually, when the two of you are in there, it's just like, there's a whole system for it, for safety. It's reasonable. It makes sense. Having said that, there was an inmate one day who said, "Hey, will you please come to my room?" And again, I'm going to remind you guys that this was whenever I was pre-transition, so I was just a very pretty 23-year-old lady at the time, right? And, this guy's like, "Hey, I want to show you something in my room." And I'm like, "Man, I'm not going into your room." And he's like, "I just want to show you something." And I'm like, "Then why don't you show it to me here? Because I'm not going back there." And he's like, "No, but it will only take a second." And he basically was like pleading, pestering. And my dumbass has always been a little bit too nice. I always have been like this, right? It's hard for me to tell people no, especially at the time. I'm better at it now, but I still find it a little bit challenging. So anyway, I'm like, okay, all right, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to stand in the hallway, and if you have something to show me that's in your room, then I'll be in the hallway, standing in the middle of the hallway, nowhere near the door, okay? And he's like, okay. And I go down the hall, and he goes in his room, and then he just pulls down his pants and whips it out and starts, doing something with his genitals while staring at me. And I'm like, all right. And I walk back, I just walk back to my manager, and I'm like, "Hey, so this just happened." And the manager just goes, "All right. Okay, noted. Thanks for letting me know." And nothing else came from it, I was not asked if I needed any kind of support. I was not offered any kind of support. It was just, okay, thanks for telling me. And that was the whole thing. So, that was one of the things that did help me solidify my decision to quit, which, to be fair, I was severely mentally ill and wanted to quit anyway. So I don't want to give myself too much credit, especially when it comes to, the ideological or, ethical, lens of me quitting, because it's not that I was, such a good guy that I was like, I don't want to, sell myself as this totally, oh, even though I, I'm a totally righteous guy and I just knew better at the time. It took me a while to figure out why that situation bothered me so much. It's there was an intrinsic sense of this is wrong and I don't want to be a part of it. But there was also, well, I don't really want to get regularly sexually, I don't know. I have a little bit of trouble deciding what to call this exactly, sexually harassed for somebody to actually take out their stuff, Luckily, like, I was not touched. I was not touched by a person. So that was good, I guess. But still, it's just, if you round up a whole bunch of people and put them in a shitty little box and you lock them up and you supervise every little thing they do and treat them like less than an animal, and tell them that they're going to probably be in there till they die, that they're going to spend their whole lives in there, they're probably going to act a little bit fucking weird. They're going to act a little weird, and I do not blame them. Truly, I can't. I've said on this channel before that I'm somebody who's been sexually abused, sexually assaulted more than once, and there are definitely some people, most people, that I have zero empathy, zero forgiveness toward, where there was absolutely no good explanation for their behavior, right? And this is just a person where I don't really hold resentment toward this person. You know, I have a feeling that some of you watching this are probably going to be thinking something like, oh my gosh, this person was a sexual predator. Like, of course they need to be locked up in here for the safety of everybody else. And, you know, the way that I'm thinking of it is like, would they be acting like that if they were on the outside? You know, like, if their behaviors had social meaning anymore, would they behave differently? Probably, right? Like, I can't imagine being in such a situation. I'm somebody who, like I said earlier, I've been involuntarily hospitalized into a psychiatric unit twice in my life, and these were very short-term stays. One of them was for about 3 days, and one of them was for about a week. Both of them were very, very traumatic for me, and like, I just cannot imagine what kind of person I would be if I ended up being involuntarily hospitalized long term. To me, it's unforgivably harmful behavior, and if it eats away at a person's soul to the extent that they end up hurting other people like that, then I don't know, it just makes sense to me. It just makes sense. Of course, it doesn't mean it's okay. It doesn't mean that they totally get off the hook for it. It doesn't mean that they're excused. It just means that it makes sense. It just means that maybe we shouldn't be locking people up into little boxes like that. That's what I think. When I think about justice, I don't think I want that person to be punished for whipping out their genitals in front of me, you know, and like touching themselves in front of me. That's not what I think. I think I want this person to have access to a life that they find worth living, to the extent that they wouldn't even think about doing something like that to someone. What I'm saying here is contrast this person to other high-profile people who've committed sexual assault. I'm talking people like Jeffrey Epstein, or people like Neil Gaiman. People who had every opportunity in the world, people who had wealth and fame, acknowledgement of their peers, both economic and social power. Powerful people, right? And they were just, even though they had everything in the world, there are some people, I guess, evidently, that still just want to harm other people, right? And when I think about this person, the dynamic was not the same. Is it possible that this is a person who would be sexually predatory, even on the outside, even if they had every opportunity, even if they had a good life or a trauma-free life? It's totally possible, you know? But when I think about the dynamic of this situation, it's just that I'm the person who had the power in the situation. I'm the person who could cause them to face more punitive measures than they already were facing. I'm the person who gets to clock out at the end of the day and leave and never think about this again if I wanted to. And he's the person who's in there forever. And I kind of just think, you know, when it comes to those punitive measures, how punitive are they really if socially it's almost like meaningless, right? Like, any relationship that he can have with any person in there is also potentially like less meaningful than a relationship that you might have as a person who is free, you know, or a relationship that he could have to, especially the people in a position of power over him. These are like virtually, in my opinion, meaningless relationships, or they might as well be. I mean, most people who work in a position like this, most people who work as essentially prison guards do not see you as a human being. If you are an incarcerated person, why would he try to have, a meaningful or respectful relationship with somebody like me? If usually it is the case, it is almost always the case that somebody in my position would have no respect for him. So why should he show that respect to me? Do you understand what I mean? If he's been dehumanized to such an extent by people like me, people who are in the position that I was in, I can understand why he would show that same kind of dehumanization and disrespect to somebody who is in my position, even if it wasn't me directly who did it to him, right? Even if it was only people like me and people who were in the same position as me. I can understand it being a retaliation. That's what I mean when I say it just makes sense to me. For somebody to do what he did, I just think if he had other stuff going on in his life, maybe that's not what he would have wanted to do, but I'm not sure if we're ever going to know that. Like, how are we ever going to know what kind of person he could have been if we keep him in such a state, right? The way that I think about it is something like, if you lock somebody up and treat him like an animal, can you really blame him if he starts acting like one? So that's pretty much the story. While I was telling it, I was kind of thinking to myself, like, man, I hope I didn't sign any kind of, like, non-disclosure agreement or something. I don't think I did. I don't remember it. But I guess if I did, I hope nothing bad happens to me. And also, you know what? I have a whole new name and identity, and it's been 9 years, and I'm not really worried about it. What's kind of interesting is that my grandpa, my dad's dad, was a prison guard, And when I think about my family, I so often am thinking about how I've just narrowly escaped this fate. Where, like, my family, they were just like a bunch of Catholic, white supremacist, like, dumbass piece of shit motherfuckers, And they tried to make me one of them. They tried real goddamn hard, and it didn't seem to work out, And I'm so thankful, Oh, I'm sorry, baby. I was trying to show you to the camera. Are you okay? Um, you know, I had to have a couple of rough experiences, first-hand experiences before I figured my shit out. It took me a little while, but I did. A lot of people had like the classic teenage anarchist experience, like reading Karl Marx in my bedroom when I was 12 years old. Like, that wasn't me. I had to see some shit before I figured my shit out. Now I figured it out, so that's okay. Jack, what do you think? Is your dad pretty cool? Do you have a pretty cool dad? I mean, I turned out okay. That's the point. My grandpa, his first name was Robert, and his middle name was Lee. Can you believe that shit? I think about it all the time. Who names their child Robert Lee? And, you probably think, well, that was a long time ago. I'm sure that your family got better between now and the 1930s or whatever, right? But no, the reality is that whenever he had some kids, he named one of his kids Robert Lee, last name Junior, and then after that kid became disabled and couldn't have their own kid, one of my uncles, after he had a kid, named his child Robert Lee the Third. And that kid was born 1 year before me, 1991. Nasty racist motherfuckers. Oh, and in case you were wondering, yes, the population at Fulton State Hospital was, of course, disproportionately black. It's safe to make the assumption. This is America after all. Okay, you guys, I'm gonna make some bubble tea and I'm gonna cuddle with my cat because that's some hard shit to remember a little bit. If you have any questions or comments or maybe experiences yourself as working as an arm of the state, somebody who learned better over time I'd be curious to hear about your experiences. If you're curious to hear about people who've also experienced stuff like this, That Dang Dad is an incredibly great YouTube channel. I don't think that he's creating anymore. He's a middle-aged dad, just a white dad, and he's also an anarchist, and he's an ex-cop. He has a lot of interesting stories and really good theory. And also just like emotionally supportive content. It's pretty sweet. Seemed like a pretty dope dude. I've messaged him on Twitter once, and he responded. He's just a nice boy, you know? So anyway, remember, good cops quit. And I'll see you again next time. Bye.